Welcome to our webinar today on Organic System Biodiversity and NRCS Practice Standards. Hello, my name is Jeff Schahczenski, and I'm an agriculture economist with the National Center for Appropriate Technology, or NCAT. We are assisting in today's broadcast of this webinar, and NCAT is one of 11 organizations who have joined with the Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS, in a 3-year National Conservation Innovation Project that is working to better integrate sustainable and organic agriculture production systems into NRCS programs and procedures. Part of this project is to provide critical information and training like this to NRCS staff, farmers, and others who may provide technical services to organic and sustainable farmers. This is the final of 5 webinars provided under this project. Copies of this and all the trainings are available on our ATRA National Sustainable Ag Information website at www.atra.ncat.org and are also available on the National NRCS website under their organic farming page as well. You can always email or phone us, the presenters today as well, and contact us on our 1-800 hotline number for the ATRA project at 1-800-346-9140 for further information about these webinars and the project in general. And if you miss those numbers, don't worry, they'll be coming up again at the end of the webinar. NCAT's role today is to provide technical assistance in the presentations and to record this webinar for later use. We encourage you to type in your questions as the webinar proceeds. Excuse me. And we will have a Q&A session after the presentations where we hope to answer as many of the questions as possible. So please don't be afraid to ask questions and type them in. Also, there will be a very short survey, very short, that will pop up immediately after the webinar ends, and we would greatly appreciate your feedback on today's webinar. The 11 organizations who are joining with NRC and NCAT in this effort are the Center for Rural Affairs, the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, the National Sustainable Agricultural Coalition, the Midwest Organic and Sustainable Education Service, or MOSES, the Organic Farming Research Foundation, the Virginia Association for Biological Farming, Florida Organic Growers, Kansas Rural Center, the Wild Farm Alliance, the Land Stewardship Project, and the Practical Farmers of Iowa. Today's presenters are Jo Ann Baumgartner, who is the director of the Wild Farm Alliance. She works on conservation, food safety, and organic issues, and is co-editor of Farming and the Fate of Wild Nature. Before joining WFA in 2001, she addressed sustainable dairy, produce, and fiber production topics, was senior research editor for Life on the Edge, a book of California's rare wildlife species, and was an organic farmer for over a decade. Jim Riddle was founding chair of the Winona Farmers Market and the International Organic Inspectors Association, or IOIA, and is co-author of the International Organic Inspection Manual. Jim served on the Minnesota Department of Agriculture's Organic Advisory Task Force and is a former chair of the National Organic Standards Board. He currently works as Organic Outreach Coordinator for the University of Minnesota Southwest Research and Outreach Center and is the elected chair of the Winona County Soil and Water Conservation District and serves on the leadership team for E-Organic. Tom Broz of Live Earth Farm operates a diverse organic farm with more than 100 acres under cultivation. His produce feeds a community that includes over 800 families in its Community-Supported Agriculture, or CSA, program, as well as customers at farmers markets, restaurants, and organic markets. Tom has integrated natural processes into the farm's operation by installing native plant hedgerows, filter strips, grass waterways, riparian plantings, and perennial grasslands throughout the farm, which we will see. So let's begin, Jo Ann.
Thank you, Jeff. You can go to the next slide. So biodiversity conservation is in the NOP regulations, the National Organic Program regulations. Operators must maintain or improve the natural resources, including soil, water, wetlands, woodlands, and wildlife. And biodiversity conservation is part of the NOP definition of organic production. In fact, the preamble says that producers must initiate practices to conserve biodiversity and to show compliance in their organic system plan, which is the same thing as their farm plan. And there are many related standards. Next. It's instructive to understand a little bit of the background of the National Organic Program. There is a body called the National Organic Standards Board, which guides how implementation occurs. And that board is appointed by the Secretary of Agriculture. 3 of the 15 members must have expertise in environmental protection and resource conservation. In addition, another member must have expertise in either toxicology, ecology, or biochemistry. Next. The NOSB has recommended the definition of biodiversity to include the variety of all life forms, from bacteria and fungi to trees and mammals, and also includes the diversity found among all levels of organization, genetic diversity, and species diversity, and includes the full range of natural processes on which life depends, such as nitrogen fixation, predation, etc. In 2005, the NOSB recommended that there be a section on biodiversity and natural resources included in their model organic system plan. In 2009, next. In 2009, they made a comprehensive recommendation where they wanted to see that biodiversity was considered before any materials were added to their substance list, their national list. They want to see consistent discussion and review of biodiversity in the organic system plans. They want to see that biodiversity was included in the audit of certification agencies, and also they'd like to see increased education. Next. So in 2005, in fact, the biodiversity questions were included in the model organic system plan. That plan does not have to be used by all certifiers. It's just an example of things that can be addressed. Some certifiers do use it though, and all reflect on it. In 2009, biodiversity was included in the considerations for the materials review. And last year, the model organic system plan was updated, and as we go through this presentation, we'll be referring to that updated version. And just a couple of months ago, the National Organic Program added the natural resources standard to their audit checklist, and that is used to credit organic certifiers. And they also added that standard to their penalty matrix. And these last 2 additions are really where the rubber is going to hit the road, so to speak, because now certifiers will not be in business if they're not checking for natural resources and biodiversity conservation. Next. Oh, this is next. Good. So implementation is still needed in a couple of fronts in order to address all that the NOSB has recommended. And one is for the program to publish either biodiversity guidance or instruction. And we actually, the Wild Farm Alliance, created these documents with broad-based input from the organic community, including organic certifiers, and feel like that really there needs to be something that the organic community can reflect on that's on the NOP website and in their handbook. And also there needs to be more education about this. There's one loophole in the National Organic Program Standards that's related to conservation. It's a pretty big problem, we feel, and the NOSB has concern about it too, and that is that instead of just suppose a farmer wanted to grow more production of a certain crop, and instead of converting conventional farmland where they'd have to wait 3 years before they could call that organic, but while they would still be farming it with organic methods but couldn't get the increased price difference. What's happened, and it's occurring all throughout the world, is that high-value conservation lands are getting converted directly into organic production, and there's no checks and balances on it. And so what we have recommended in the guidance, and the NOSB will be discussing it this next month, is that the operators, but what I mean by operators includes farmers, ranchers, people that do wild crop harvesting, and also handlers. They're all considered operators and must conform with the natural resource standard, that they first check with a certifier before they do any kind of land conversion, and actually that they document the biological and environmental effects, and possibly with NRCS assistance using the environmental evaluation CPA 52 document and or a similar document, so that there is an environmental assessment that then can the operator can reflect on that and see if they still want to go forward with the conversion, and or maybe they wouldn't go for, they would conserve sensitive areas and only convert, you know, areas that aren't high value for conservation. And then the operator would also work with the certifier on mitigation measures to address any kind of ways in which the high value lands are converted. And so there's some kind of similar or some kind of mitigation that helps to conserve other lands, nearby lands potentially. So it's also helpful to understand with the organic production the concept about how land certification it really depends on how much land the operator has put into their certification. Some farmers and others will put in their whole property, and others might just put in the production field. But if that production field is right up against a riparian habitat, then that too would, it's not like, you know, it's exactly, that would exactly be cut off. So it would, the riparian habitat would be part of it. So we're gonna switch over to Jim now.
Okay, thanks, Jo Ann, and thanks for giving a good overview of some of the organic requirements. I'm going to be talking in more detail now and give some examples of the language from the NOP regulation as they relate to natural resource and biodiversity conservation. So the very first part of the organic standards, the general requirements that apply to all operations, say that the production practices must maintain or improve the natural resources of the operation, including soil and water quality. And it even goes so far as to define that term, natural resources of the operation, as the physical, hydrological, and biological features of a production operation, including soil, water, wetlands, woodlands, and wildlife. So it's really talking about all of the natural resources that must be maintained or improved. And the very definition of organic production covers this as well. It's defined as a production system, so a systems approach to agriculture that's managed to respond to site-specific conditions by integrating cultural, biological, and mechanical practices that foster the cycling of resources, promote ecological balance, and conserve biodiversity. So you see that's a very holistic definition, or an ecological definition. And when the NOP issued the final rule, It was accompanied by what's called the preamble, where they explain the text of the rule and the changes that were made based on comments. And in that preamble, they did say that they amended the definition of organic production to require that producers conserve biodiversity, and the use of the word conserve establishes that the producer must initiate practices to support biodiversity and avoid, to the extent practicable, any activities that would diminish it. So that kind of reflects on what Jo Ann was talking about of conversion of high-value habitats, that's certainly already being discouraged by the NOP in this language in the preamble. But it would be helpful for them to issue further guidance, as Jo Ann says, on this topic to bring everybody onto the same page. Next. Back to you, Jo Ann.
Yeah, back to me. Thanks, Jim. So as I had mentioned earlier, there is a model organic system plan that the NOP has published, and in it there's many ways in which they suggest that a farm and or ranch, wild crop harvester and or handler could support biodiversity, maintain or improve natural resources. And so this first slide talks about how can support beneficial organisms, pollinators, insects, arthropods, bats and raptors, and other kinds of pest predators. And down below at the bottom of the slide, there's examples of applicable NRCS Conservation Practice Standards, listing just two here, but of course there's all kinds of plantings, especially when they're native plantings, that can support wildlife. So listed here is hedgerows and conservation cover. Next. Another suggestion is similar to foster habitat that provides for pollinators and other beneficials. And here we talk about field borders and windbreaks are examples of NRCS practice standards. Promoting wildlife corridors is in the model OSP too. And riparian forest buffers, any kind of vegetation that provides connectivity, like riparian forest buffer or windbreak, can support wildlife movement, as can other kinds of practice standards like the wetland wildlife habitat and upland wildlife habitat management practice standard. The model OSP recommends water conservation that benefits native species and riparian ecosystems, and some examples of that have to do with irrigation practice standards like the micro irrigation and irrigation management. And for handling operations, sometimes handlers can have effluent coming from their processing facilities where they need to treat that water, and the NRCS constructed wetland practice standard could help with that. Then the model OSP recommends wetland protection and restoration. Of course, NRCS has several wetland practice standards, and then the early successional habitat development could potentially help with that also. Protecting riparian areas is suggested, and NRCS practice standards, there's a couple of riparian practice standards, the herbaceous cover and the forest buffer, but there's also the stream habitat improvement and management practice standard and shallow water development and management again.
Okay, coming back to the OSP, does have language about native habitat restoration, and this slide is taken at my farm in southeast Minnesota, organic farm do not spray sign, and you'll see in the foreground some echinacea and some bergamot, and just wanted to talk a moment about some of the steps we've done to restore or reintroduce native prairie not using chemicals. So we commonly will, and we have about 80 acres of restored prairie on our land where we have typically done a controlled burn, and we haven't used the practice standard cost share, but it is available there, as well as things like restoring and managing rare and declining habitats. But we've done either fall or spring burns and then no-till planting of the prairie species into freshly burned areas. And I think the next slide shows some active burn going on. And then typically having to burn the first 3 years after planting, but then scaling back to burning maybe 1 year out of 3. And the language from the organic standards prohibits burning as a means of disposal of crop residues, but it does allow burning to suppress the spread of disease or to stimulate seed germination, and that's specifically how we're using that to restore native prairies. The standards also require that an operator have defined boundaries and buffer zones to prevent the unintended application of prohibited substances from adjoining land uses. So these buffer zones are an excellent opportunity to plant windbreaks of diverse species that, you know, provide a buffer from wind-blown pollutants or wind erosion, but also are an excellent place to have wildlife habitat and habitat for beneficials, for predators. And you know, you do these things to, on the one hand, meet the standards, but much more importantly, to meet agronomic benefits to your operation. And there's the NRCS practice standards that can help achieve that on your farm.
The grass waterway can also help achieve that, especially if there's some kind of effluent coming off a farm above, and that could be diverted through a grass waterway or a diversion ditch. It's helpful to understand that producers have to keep records of what they're doing, and for conservation practices they may want to first check in with their certifier to see if in fact the certifier has any comments on what they're doing before they put a practice in place, and then they may have to keep records of that. And for instance, with a windbreak that's used as a buffer for pesticide drift, it may be important that the certifier comes out and looks to see what's the wind direction, you know, what kind of windbreak are you going to plant, how wide, how, you know, what species, how tall, and sometimes the certifier will give feedback on that, so it's important to check with them. NOP model organic system plan also, of course, suggests plantings that check erosion, and NRCS is so good with that. Here's some suggestions: conservation cover, contour buffer strips, herbaceous wind barriers, and filter strips.
Yeah, the standards under fertility management require that the producer implement tillage and cultivation practices that maintain or improve the physical, chemical, and biological condition of the soil. So building that soil health, which is becoming much more awareness of the importance of that. The standards also say that the organic farmer has to minimize soil erosion. So here are some practice standards that can help accomplish that on an organic farm. The nutrient management standard also says that the fertility system on an organic farm has to be managed in a way that doesn't contribute to contamination of crop, soil, or water, by plant nutrients, pathogens, heavy metals, or residues of prohibited substances. So an operation might really benefit from implementing a Plan 590, a nutrient management plan, or if you're looking to compost animal manures, the compost practice standard could be a real benefit to help meet these requirements on your organic operation and not contaminate crop soil or water with various contaminants.
These days, there's a lot of interest in food safety, and especially after the spinach contamination in 2006, when there was a big pushback, and it was thought that wildlife were a huge concern, and wildlife habitat was being taken out quite a bit to make buyers happy. And in fact, there can be wildlife habitat and conservation practices with good food safety practices coexisting on a farm. And we, Wild Farm Alliance, are working on a technical note for NRCS on co-managing food safety and conservation objectives and specialty crops as part of a conservation innovation grant project. And this slide here shows, it's just kind of a teaser slide actually, because the publication isn't complete yet, but there's 24 different ways we've identified how practice standards can help to help farmers co-manage food safety and conservation.
Another requirement under the organic standards is that every organic farm have a soil building crop rotation, and this is specifically for annual crops, and I'll touch on perennials in a moment. But with annual crops, there has to be a crop rotation, and including things such as sod, cover crops, green manure crops, catch crops that provide the following functions. And this is language right out of the regulation: that they maintain or improve the soil organic matter content. That's huge. Provide pest management in annual and perennial crops, manage deficient or excess plant nutrients, and provide erosion control. So you see NRCS practice standards that are directly relevant: the conservation crop rotation, the cover crop, the IPM, or nutrient management, all can be applicable to help you meet your soil building crop rotation requirements. And crop rotation is defined under the NOP as the practice of alternating annual crops grown on a specific field in a pattern or sequence in successive years, so that the crops of the same species or family are not grown repeatedly without interruption. But then it has language about perennial crops, and this is very interesting. Perennial cropping systems employ means such as alley cropping, intercropping, and hedgerows to introduce biological diversity in lieu of a crop rotation. So here the NRCS practice standards for alley cropping or multi-story cropping or hedgerows can really help in a perennial cropping system meet those same objectives. The NOP under the pest, weed, and disease management standard says that an organic farmer first uses preventative measures, so that crop rotation, sanitation, removal of weed seeds, diseased plants, things like that, selecting plant varieties that are well adapted to the site. And once again, the conservation crop rotation can be helpful in meeting this for disease and weed management. Also using mechanical or physical measures such as introduction of predators or parasites, but even more long-term is natural habitat development for those beneficial organisms on the farm. Then using lures, traps, repellents, things like that are used commonly in IPM programs. And then when those cultural, physical measures are insufficient, then non-synthetic inputs or substances on the national list can be used, but only after these preventative practices have been implemented. So once again, we see some NRCS standards, hedgerow planting, field borders, contour buffer strips, and windbreak establishment that can really help achieve these objectives. Now for weeds, the NOP says that you can mulch with biodegradable materials, mow, graze livestock, do hand weeding, mechanical cultivation, flame weeding, or then use plastic or synthetic mulches so long as they're removed from the field at the end of the harvest or growing season. And some NRCS standards such as mulching and prescribed grazing can be helpful with that.
Invasive species, invasive weeds especially, can be big problems for conservation plantings, and so there's lots of practice standards that can be used when NRCS staff get creative, not just the herbaceous weed control standard, but also brush management, critical area planting, forage harvest management, and range planting.
It's really important to understand, especially if you work for the NRCS and have an organic farmer or a transitioning farmer, even someone who's just wanting to transition one field or one plot of land come in, that there are restrictions on the inputs that can be used on their operation, even to implement the conservation practices. Because under the NOP, most synthetic inputs, including synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, seed treatments, treated lumber, are prohibited. And if an organic farmer or a transitioning farmer comes into the NRCS and applies to do a conservation activity plan to help write up a plan to transition to organic production, for everyone to understand that they need to be using approved inputs and approved practices during that transition time, as well as once they're certified organic. Oh, that looks good about now, some morel mushrooms. It's still going to be a while till it comes to that season, but there is in the NOP a specific standard which allows wild crops to be certified as organic. So the land has to be 3 years without prohibited materials, and then the area has to be harvested and managed in a way that ensures that the harvesting or gathering will not be destructive to the environment and will sustain the growth and production of the wild crop. So that NRCS practice standard for restoring and managing rare and declining habitats could be helpful in a wild crop harvesting operation. When we look at livestock, we need to know that the organic standards have language that influences conservation, natural resource protection as well. All organic animals have to have access to the outdoors, shade, shelter, exercise area, clean water for drinking, etc. And that ruminants must be on pasture during the grazing season. So if you are an organic or you're thinking about going organic, that NRCS practice standard for prescribed grazing or silvopasture management can help you set up paddocks and watering systems to really manage that land so that it meets this definition of pasture, which is right in the NOP. Pasture is defined as land used for livestock grazing that's managed, so it's not just neglected, to provide feed value and maintain or improve the soil, water, and vegetative resources. So the grazing land mechanical treatment could be another one in addition to prescribed grazing. The organic standards require access to the outdoors, but there are some allowances for temporary confinement. And I realize the text on this slide is a little out of date. The NOP has gone farther in clarifying exactly when animals can be temporarily confined, such as the time of day for milking or shearing or medical treatments or for a 4-H or FFA event. But the one thing that hasn't changed at all is that animals can be temporarily confined if they would cause harm to the soil or water quality by being out on the pasture. And now for a couple of years there has been further language added to the NOP pertaining to ruminant animals, and there's even a separate section now, a pasture practice standard. And I'm not going into the details of that requirement except where it overlaps with conservation. That practice standard requires that the grazing system be managed to prevent erosion and to protect natural wetlands and riparian areas. So once again, prescribed grazing, fencing, or stream crossing NRCS practice standards can help achieve that.
So the model OSP promotes planting diverse pastures, and there's a couple of practice standards that can help with that, the pasture and hay planting and range planting. And that model OSP recommends using non-lethal livestock predator control. Instead of killing everything that moves, it's much better for the organic producer to first try alternative methods like using guard animals or herding large animals with small animals, so that the large animals scare off the coyotes and other predators from the small ones. And the OSP recommends using wildlife-friendly fencing, such as non-barbed wire fencing. This document, the Biodiversity Conservation for Organic Farmers and Certifiers, is available on our website and covers a lot of what we've discussed today. It's at www.wildfarmalliance.org. You can download it for free.
Hi, I'm Tom Broz, and I'm the owner of Live Earth Farm. Thank you for the opportunity to share some of our conservation practices. Our farm is located in the central coast of California near the Monterey Bay, near Watsonville, in the foothills of the Santa Cruz Mountains. And we are a very diverse farming operation, growing approximately 50 different kind of crops, vegetables, and fruits over the course of the season. We're mostly focused on direct marketing approaches, such as community-supported agriculture, farmers markets, and then selling directly to stores and restaurants. I personally am, committed and like to farm surrounded by what I would call, wilder, natural, native environments. And I enjoy having the diversity of plant and animal species in our farming environment. It is very challenging, no doubt. I believe many farmers would agree that it is not easy to strike a balance between the natural habitat and the more cultivated environments that we work with. And in 2007, we were fortunate to acquire a parcel of land that had a lot of beautiful natural features, and we embarked on a very ambitious project jointly with the Wild Farm Alliance, the Community Alliance for Family Farmers, the California Wildlife Conservation Board, and also with the technical assistance of NRCS. And maybe the next slide would show a better picture of a little bit of the farm. You can kind of see how we have, we're surrounded by kind of the redwoods and the oak woodlands in the background, and in the front, in the flatter grounds, we have orchards and the cultivated vegetable fields. And as we embarked on this project, one of the objectives, of course, was to, one was to create a wildlife corridor between our riparian corridor and the redwood forest along the ridges above the farm and beyond the property, and then also leaving significant portions of the farm in its wild state, and then restoring the edges of these natural habitats, creating buffers, and enhancing through these buffers also the benefits to the crops by planting the hedgerows and filter strips, and taking even more marginal, steep farmland out of production. When we looked at and assessed the natural features of the farm, we came to realize that there's a lot of issues with the stabilizing soils, and there was runoff, and we're really trying to create something where we would minimize the impact on both the farmland as well as on the native habitat around. So it was a 3-year project, and as we embarked on it, one of the benefits was really to assess the whole property and look at it more holistically. And as we looked at the various projects, specific projects, maybe another slide, as we looked at the specific projects, we and then tried to figure out how to implement them. It was a learning curve for sure, just from how to coordinate each of these projects with our regular farming practices, and how to allocate the resources that we had, and coordinating that with resources that were being provided by the various other organizations. So for example, implementing a hedgerow would require having the planting material in place. Sometimes we would grow out the plants, or providing some of the irrigation equipment, the installation of it, bringing mulch on site, having the labor, some of the land preparation, the equipment that's needed for that. So there was a lot of additional work that needed to be included and coordinated while we were doing our regular farming. And it worked very well, and it's really important that there is some flexibility, of course, in implementing all these projects, given, of course, the seasons and the demands that I guess we had on our end, just from farming. Maybe the next slide. You can see some of the steeper terrain on the farm. There was right here in front some soil erosion and it was caused by farming practices before we purchased the property, that was being disked and regularly. There's a lot of dry farmed apple production that was in place there, and we decided to take that land out of production and then plant native plants and stabilizing that slope. All of these plantings require initially a lot of management from, as I said, installation of irrigation systems, mulching, weeding, etc. Next slide. You can see here, this was a group that was at the end of the project visiting kind of the various efforts that we were that we got into. This is a native grass filter strip, and along the farm roads, of course, water is always an issue, water runoff, and establishing these filter strips has really helped reduce the erosion and decreasing the speed at which the water would run off. Establishing a native grass filter strip is always a challenge. We realize that growing plugs and then planting those is a lot more successful than direct seeding. Next slide. Here we're just walking along, and you can see in the background a steeper hillside where that we also took out of production and just planted native plants, connecting this to the left a native stand of willows with farther to the right a stand of native oaks. And here we really try to plant species that attract pollinators, beneficial insects, and we used old coffee bags to mulch the plants, so we wouldn't have to weed as much. Next slide. Next slide. Here again, a native grass filter strip, and you have a native hedgerow in the background, the road, and then the field is to the left, so we're really starting to buffer the road and the field to, and you can see how where the native grasses were planted, there's already other species that are starting to establish themselves, coyote brush and oak. Next slide. Here we have, this was a project we did with Montessori school kids. They took cuttings from willows and stuck them on this steeper hillside where we experienced soil erosion and small landslide. And this is a nice way to kind of control that runoff. And we had to water these willows initially, but now they're probably 12, 14 feet tall. Next. Here, as I said, we're trying to create a buffer between the native stands. To the right, this is oak and redwoods, and then we created a double hedgerow, and then to the left would be the fields, the farm fields. This way, we would prevent from encroaching into the more native stands, and at the same time having the hedgerows, the benefit of the hedgerows of attracting some of the beneficials. Next slide. Here's another view of hedgerow in the front, the oak woodland and the redwood forest. We plant in between. Can't really see that, but we have where the people are standing there. We have a native grasses that were planted there, and then also a corridor of we created a corridor and connected the oak woodland with the redwood forest by just planting additional trees and native plants. Next slide. This is something that I believe we would never have been able to afford, and that is to remove invasive species, plant species that are on the farm, this pampas grass. And there's a next slide. Maybe here in the redwood stand, we had a very large area of English ivy that was growing on the ground and up the trees, and we're very. It was really an amazing effort by conservation groups to come in with the people and in 2-3 days removing them. Something that we could not have done with our own workers. And next slide. Here is a pollinator hedgerow between 2 fields, and we've done that throughout our farm. You see the apple orchard in the background, and then a beet field to the right just coming up, and left we have the Brussels sprouts. We have groups that are studying these hedgerows and are really seeing an amazing diversity and number of beneficials that have established themselves in these. I find it really important to have habitat right in the middle of and between fields, that when we, for example, mow our cover crop in the spring, that the beneficials that are in the cover crop can move into these areas. Next. A result of the project was also to create, to have some educational information, since we have an education program on the farm. 1,500 kids come through the farm every year. And to have a resource like that, where we have a map and a description of all these efforts, has been really an asset. It allows people to walk the farm. It's like a self-guided tour. There's a map right in the middle, and there's numbers and markers that people can follow and kind of understand how the practices, the conservation practices, and the more cultivated, the field practices are side by side. And it's a great way to explain that to the children and to students and to adults and anybody interested that in the subject. So as an outcome of the project, this was really a great, I think, benefit. Is there another slide? This is the actual map. There's a legend, and you can kind of see on the left fields and native forests and the various projects. It's kind of hard to see the round circles with numbers on them, but there are numbers from 1 to 11 markers, physical markers in the field next to each project, and then a description of each of it. So yeah, that was also paid for by Watts Farm Alliance and by the agencies that were involved in this. Overall, I think this is a long-term project, and I think we're continuing to work with NRCS, and they are now funding other projects similar to these, so it was a real learning curve here to see what is feasible and what is a priority. And in the long term, I think this is definitely going to be an asset. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Jim, and thank you, Jo Ann. We've had some questions during the webinar, and I'll begin at the beginning. One question, and this may be for Jim or Jo Ann, and I must admit I don't really understand organic inspection that well, and maybe this has to do with it. The question was, is there any discussion going on about how field identification can be streamlined? My experience is that there are 2 different identification systems, and this can be quite confusing with certifiers and inspectors who are working with an applicant. I believe that might be something to do with certification, and I'm not sure if it's relevant, but it was one of the questions asked. So anyone have a sense of this? Leave it open to anyone.
Well, I don't quite understand the question either, Jeff. What's being asked about field identification? I don't.
Yeah, I didn't get it either. I thought maybe it had something to do with going through the inspection process and pre-identifying where the locations of fields are, but I don't see that it's actually that relevant. But I guess I was just guessing that maybe you guys might know.
I will just comment that along with the organic system plan, every operator applicant has to submit a field map, and it's, you know, you show all the fields that you want to get certified, but it's also really helpful to show the various natural habitat areas, waterways, hedgerows, buffer zones, certainly on those maps, because so that I would recommend that for anyone who's planning to get certified, to make sure and have a comprehensive map of your farm and fields.
Thanks, Jim. The next question is, are all certifiers and inspectors really dealing with biodiversity, or is it still something that's really in the future?
Well, I'll comment, and then I think probably Jo Ann has some things to say on this. Well, I would say that not good enough. And that's one of the big benefits of the work that Jo Ann and the Wild Farm Alliance has done, is to bring it to the attention first of the NOSB, and the board made recommendations, and now the program has put out some additional language and are looking at what certifiers are doing, but that's in the next rounds of accreditation, and partly because even though all these things are in the standards, they haven't been fully enforced or looked at during the inspections and certifications.
Yeah,
Jo Ann,
that's
anything
right.
to add?
Yeah, that's right, Jim. When the NOSB first put together the model organic system plan that addressed natural resources and biodiversity conservation in 2005, some certifiers started paying attention to that, like Florida Organic Growers and CCOF in California and Oregon Tilth and others. I mean, there's maybe more than a handful that are addressing it, I think, very well. And some of those certification agencies are large, or have a bunch of a large percentage of organic farmers in the nation. So I think that it's, you know, it's already happening in certain areas of the country, and it's coming, because now that the NOP has added the natural resource standard to their accreditation checklist and to their penalty matrix. It's just a matter of time that, as Jim said, it's not that they're reaccredited every year. I think maybe it's every 5 years, but it's a matter of time. As they get reaccredited, they're going to have to show that they're checking for natural resource compliance, and if they aren't, they won't get reaccredited.
This is Tom here, and I think from a farmer's perspective, what might be really useful for a lot of the agencies that are involved in this is to also work with the farmers to really assess and prioritize and see that there is at least a process by which the farmer can understand how these practices can benefit, what it would cost, how they can go about implementing them in such a way that it will enhance and complement what is happening on the ground. I mean, from a farm perspective, and I think that's where looking at the regulations is one thing, but working together in collaborating and really trying to look at the practical and the priorities on a case-by-case basis, I think is important.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, this is a good question, and to follow up with you, Tom, and there was actually quite a few more specific for the farmer, and I know Jim's a farmer too, so he can certainly get in there. But one question was regarding Tom's participation in specific NRCS programs before this project started, or during this project, or after, and I guess it's getting to the question of have you used specific NRCS programs? Are you going to be using specific NRCS programs? Or, I mean, you've done a very good and extensive work on your farm, obviously for conservation and wildlife enhancement, but we're just wondering what agency involvement, from the beginning has created this beautiful farm.
Right. I think at the beginning, we started this joint project with Wild Farm Alliance, the Community Alliance for Family Farmers, and the Wildlife Conservation Board, and then NRCS was always invited and participated in this first project that I kind of described. But out of that collaboration, now we have embarked on a multi-year kind of project with NRCS directly, and they're kind of continuing to help us with other interests, from helping to look at irrigation management to other more farm-focused practices that are being funded, but also putting more hedgerows in, erosion control practices that we couldn't address with this first initial project. So I think NRCS is playing a much more direct role, funding-wise, technical assistance, than as we proceed.
Here's another.
Just
go ahead, Jim.
Oh.
Go ahead, Jim.
Oh, yeah, just on our farm, I showed a few pictures of some of the native prairie, and we have 83 acres enrolled in the CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program, but now just recently have gotten a CAP, a Conservation Activity Plan under EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, to write a forest management plan for our 256 acres of woods. And so that's really going to help us with mechanical, non-chemical control of invasive species such as buckthorn and honeysuckle, and improve how we manage our forests. So those are a couple programs we've participated in directly.
And here's another one that actually relates to that, and I think NRCS, as you said, Jim, NRCS Conservation Activity Plan with practice that supports organic transitioning, and the question is, does or can this plan, the CAP plan, substitute for an OSP?
Technically, yes. Under the NOP rule, it allows for that potential. An organic system plan could be substituted by a plan written for conservation practices or purposes, so long as it asks all the same questions in addition to the ones needed for that CAP, or conservation activity plan. In reality, we still have a ways to go to have that crosswalk so that there's one plan that meets two purposes. But I see we're making progress in that direction, but we're not quite there yet.
And I go back to Tom again for some of these. Has your efforts in conservation improved your pest management and nutrient management on your farm? Can you actually see kind of maybe actual economic benefits that have come from the result of that effort?
You know, there are several people right now looking at the beneficial insects that have moved in and the pollinators that have moved in. I think actual economic data, you know, and how directly, you know, correlating those efforts at this point is probably a little early, but I'm currently looking at, you know, having these perennial hedgerows in the fields or intersecting the fields is working in the sense that we know we have the beneficials in there, and so looking at having to reduce any kind of pest control practices, and I'm looking at like aphid populations, and we grow a lot of brassicas over the course of the year. We're doing several things beyond just the conservation practices. We're also interplanting annuals within the crops like alyssum. So I think it's hard to know how the dynamic plays out and how this eventually will reduce. I know it does reduce the amount of, I mean, this year is one year that we felt like we had probably used a lot less control practices as we have in the past, but that's kind of anecdotal, and I can't really say we have hard data at this point. As far as nutrient management, I know we've reduced, you know, erosion and the hydrology. You know, during certain rainstorms, we've seen a real improvement of how the water moves along the landscape and how it, you know, is not impacting certain areas that were being impacted in the past. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Tom. No, that's good. Here's one. If we have native and wildlife areas already present on the farm, is it necessary to enhance them? Or are these areas just better left undisturbed? And the end of that question is, it's a kind of a three-part. Is there NRCS incentives, I think money too, I suppose, or technical assistance, to leave wild areas wild? Jo Ann, I think maybe that could be you.
Yeah, well, there's always going to be benefits to leaving the wild area wild, but augmenting the farm with specifically plants that support beneficial insects. If you want to increase your pollinators, there are plants that NRCS can suggest to do that, and some of those same plants can be used to increase beneficial predatory and parasitic insects. And so that is specifically, you know, going to help with production. But, and then any kind of erosion control, even though you might have a natural system, because it's a farm, the edges of the farm could potentially be eroding, or the middle, but the edges, you know, could support filter strips that then help keep the soil in place. And
I have just a few things to add to that, and this is, you know, in the wild areas, you may say, well, they're not very productive, but we see, for example, you showed some mushrooms. I mean, we have some chanterelles that will, you know, be of benefit. There is also, in our area, we're close to an urban center. One shouldn't underestimate the agro-tourism factor. A lot of people are looking for places to that where they can enjoy both the farm and being surrounded by more natural environments is definitely an attraction aesthetically. And we've had weddings and we had U-picks and all kinds of things that are kind of it just becomes, the farm becomes more of an attraction to people to visit. And I think to enhance, instead of, to enhance your natural environments, I think is a benefit there. Yeah.
And then
I would
go ahead, Jim.
Okay. I was just going to add
okay,
that, that NRCS doesn't give money out just to conserve an area, but they do help with cost share to restore natural areas. So that's the difference.
Yeah, and it really depends on what type of natural area you're talking about and what state it's in. Oftentimes, say a native prairie area will benefit and become even richer in biodiversity with an occasional burn. Or a woodland area might be subject to invasive species and something. So some management certainly can help. There might be areas where it totally is best just left alone, but oftentimes a little bit of management can go a long way to both maintain and enhance that biodiversity on that wild area. And it's certainly something to go in to the NRCS office and just talk with them, lay out, they'll look at the maps and, what are your objectives? And they might have a program that fits your operation.
Jo Ann, did you want to, one last question, I think, because we're getting here, and I think this will wrap it up, but I think it's a critical one and perhaps maybe too long to answer too long, but it's one viewer was saying, I still don't see how food safety concern over wild animal intrusion and feces has been addressed, particularly for organic farming. I mean, this is a big issue. I know that Jo Ann's been working on personally, I know, and others, and it's seeming to become more and more of a problem. So I guess one way to say this is, can wildlife and wildlife enhancement and protection coexist with farms, and organic farms in particular?
Yeah, well, a short answer is there's a webinar that's going to be scheduled in January, so I'll keep you posted on that, which will cover this in detail. But yeah, farmers have never wanted to sell produce that was contaminated, so there's just thoughtful ways to go about making sure that doesn't happen, from making sure that if there's feces right next to a crop that you don't harvest right next to there, and you get rid of the feces in a proper way. If you have a compost pile right next to your crop, you need a windbreak or some kind of protection from that compost, which may not be completely composted and the pathogens dead. You need some kind of protection from wind blowing that into the crop. And then there's diversion ditches or grassed waterways that can help divert water coming off of a slope that might be grazed by animals, and so keeping that water from entering a crop area is really important. So those are just a few ways, but there's all kinds of ways in which farms can coexist.
We've lost them.
Yeah.
Oh, hello?
Oh, I'm sorry. I hit the mute button. Anyway, I want to thank everyone. I think we're going to end here today. I think we got most of the questions. Any other questions that are lingering, we'll be getting back to you directly. Again, I want to thank all the participants. It was an excellent tour of a farm, and I learned a lot, and I hope you all did too. Again, these will be available for full viewing if you had to cut out early, or if you want others to see it. They will be available on our ATRA website, and NRCS will also have them available on their site under their organic agriculture part of their website. And feel free, as always, to call our 1-800 number and ask any questions of these folks. And we've been putting their emails and numbers up too. We'll get the questions to you if you need them answered. And again, thank you, and have a good afternoon.